Hi and Assalamualaikum. My name is Putera Aiman bin Borhanuddin and my matrix number is S59610. In this video, I will show you how to solve this case given by my lecturer by using Microsoft Visio. And my task is I need to prepare context diagram, data flow diagrams and document flowcharts. For the first task, I started by drawing a circle and name it SNS accounts payable. The circle represents a data transformation process that transforms input to outputs. Then I draw a square shape and name it purchasing. This square shape is the data source and purpose to send data and receive data from the system. Then using a data flow in the shape of a curved line arrow, it transfers the purchasing order from the data source to the transformation process. Next, I draw the second data source, which is receiving. And by using the data flow curve line arrow, it sends the receiving reports to transformation process. Then I draw the third data source, which is vendor. Then using the data flow, the vendor has sent an invoice to the transformation process. And receive payment and remittance advice from the transformation process. And finally, I draw the last data source, which is the management that will get account payables reports from the transformation process. And now, my first task has been completed. Let's proceed to the second task. I start with draw three data sources, which is vendor, purchasing, and receiving. For data source of vendor, it will send data to a transformation process named record payable. And the data sent by the vendor is an invoice. For data source of purchasing and receiving, it will send the data to transformation process named collect and store purchase orders and receiving reports. And the data sent by purchasing is the purchase order, while receiving is the receiving reports. Next, I draw a data store that is represented by two horizontal lines that serve as the storage of data. I create two data stores named account payable and vendor invoice, which will receive data from the record payable transformation process. Next, I create two more data stores named purchase orders and receiving reports, which will receive data from the collect and store purchase orders and receiving reports transformation process. Next, from all the data stores that has been created, it will send the data to the make payment transformation process. Data store of account payable is different from the others because it will receive back data from the make payment transformation process. And the make payment transformation process requires two data stores named Cash Disbursement Journal and also paid invoice. It will also send the data to the data source of the vendor and the data is payment and remittance advice. In addition, the data store of account payable also send data to the transformation process to prepare management reports. It will send data to the data source of management and the data send account payable reports. Now, my second task has been completed. Let's move on to the last task. I use a cross-functional flowchart to complete this task. First of all, I name this flowchart document as SNS account payables, as well as its section as account payables, controller, and lastly owner and manager. For the account payable section, I draw three terminals, which is from purchasing, from receiving, and lastly from vendor. This terminal is used as a beginning, end, or point of interruption in a process, also used to indicate an external party. Then, I draw the three document and document flow to transfer from terminal to the document. The document are purchase order, receiving report, and vendor invoice. The document is used as an electronic or paper document or report. Then, send the document of purchase order and receiving report to the storage by document flow. Then, draw the paper document file named as A. Then, I draw the manual operation, record accounts payable for vendor invoice. Manual operation is a processing operation performed manually. Then, draw ledger of account payable ledger. Ledger is used to be a safe or storage record and account. Then, draw a manual operation of prepare monthly accounts payable. Next, draw a document of accounts payable report. After that, draw an on-page connector and label it as D. On-page connector is used for connecting the processing flow on the same page and its usage avoid line crisscrossing a page. Next, draw the document of vendor invoice from record account payable. Then, use flow to send the paper document file of A. Then, draw manual operation of match purchase order, receiving report, and invoice. and receive data from paper document file of A. Draw the multiple copies of one paper document, which is purchase order, receiving report, and vendor invoice. Multiple copies of one paper document is used to illustrate it by overlapping the document. Then, send to on-page connector of A. Then, draw on-page connector of C to send to the multiple copies of one paper document, which is a purchase order, record reports, vendor invoice, and check 2. And lastly, send to paper document file of A. For starter in the control section, I draw on page connector of A and send to multiple copies of one paper document, which is a purchase order, receiving report, and vendor invoice. After that, send to manual operation of prepare vendor checks. Then, send to journal of cash disbursement journal. And from manual operation of prepare vendor checks, it's sent to multiple copies of one paper document, which is a purchase order, receiving report, vendor invoice, check 1 and check 2. And lastly, send to on-page connector of B. For status in the owner or manager section, draw on-page connector of B and send to multiple copies of one paper document, which is a purchase order, receiving report, vendor invoice, check 1 and check 2. Then, send to the manual operation of review and sign checks. After that, send to the document of check 1 and end with terminal to vendor. After that, from manual operation of review and sign checks, it's sent to multiple copies of one paper document, which is a purchase order, receiving report, vendor invoice, and check 2. Then, send to on page connector of C. Next, I draw on page connector of D and send to document of account payable report. After that, send to manual operation of review account payable report. And end with paper document file of D. Now, the third task, which is the last task, has been completed. Hopefully, my explanation can be understood easily and clearly. Thank you.